So we're going to talk about toxic people.
Rafi's Rambles, Rafi's Rambles, Rafi's Rambles.
Hola, you amazing artist, and welcome to the studio. Whether you are dealing with a family member, a friend, an acquaintance, somebody who commissioned you for some art, somebody who you're working for, somebody who you work with, basically any human out there can be a toxic influence in your life.
Ooh, look at you. You guys are so YouTube famous.
We're going to talk about how to spot toxic people, our opinions on that, and what it is that we do whenever we're dealing with somebody who is toxic in our life. Forewarned, this video is kind of long because this is a very big subject, and even within the length of this video, it's not like we're going to be able to cover every single nuance of it. This is important to us because as an artist, it's very important that we distance ourselves from anything that is going to drain us. So the first thing I want to make clear is that when somebody is toxic, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are a bad person or, like that they're an evil person. That's a terrible laugh. People could be rather toxic due to their own insecurities.
I am guilty in my earlier years of exhibiting numerous of these behaviors that I don't condone any longer. I did it because I was coming from a place of despair and powerlessness.
And I was trying to control my environment and the people around me to make myself feel safe or make myself feel better. And I think that really that's where that toxicity comes from. The unwillingness to admit that, like, I've got some work to do on myself because you're constantly shifting blame on other people around you.
For sure. I think step one is to recognize those things in yourself and work to moving away from that towards more genuine empowerment, and then being able to recognize when those behaviors are coming into your sphere as well.
In fact, I believe that most of the issues that we run into in society have to do more with individual insecurity and stuff like that, that just causes you to have those momentary lapses of brilliance, and it causes you to sometimes behave in a way that maybe you're not so happy about, but there are some people that decide to change that about themselves, and there are some people that just pawn it off on others and make excuses for it. Relationships could be difficult. Relationships could be demanding. They could be great. They could be, they're complex. Relationships between one person and another are these complex vehicles that involve so many things that, like, to just plainly say, well, this person is completely toxic or something like that, like, only you could really determine that for yourself. Sometimes people are just having a bad day, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they are a toxic person, especially if it's like a one-off or it just happens every once in a while and you're able to actually talk to them about it, and they're not just making excuses about it. Then it doesn't necessarily mean that that person is toxic. It just means that person was having a bad day. Many times for a lot of us, and I know that this is the case for me, is that you grow up in a toxic environment. So you don't necessarily notice when you're in a toxic relationship later on, because that's just kind of the world as you know it.
I think the single worst thing you can do in a toxic situation is tell yourself that it's not a big deal. Because just like with anything that's bad for you, any toxic substance, you will build a tolerance to it without even realizing. And next thing you know, years have gone by and you're like, I don't know who I am.
So how do you know if you're dealing with somebody who's toxic? How do you recognize that? And the thing that I do is I have 8 things. There's probably more, but there are 8 things that really stand out to me that I look at. The first thing, and it's the most important thing, is that they don't respect your boundaries. When you are an adult and you are living your own life and you get to determine who it is that you are, and maybe you have friends, family, it doesn't really matter who it is, just any other human, and you've set up your boundaries. You're like, this is what I want to do, or this is who I am, or this is my life, and they just don't respect the boundary. That's one of the first things to look at, where people just kind of integrate themselves into your life, but starting to feel like maybe you don't have control over what your life is all about. And that's something really important to look at. If I say, I'm not okay with this, do they push at that boundary or do they respect that? Number two, and this happens, you have people that bring drama into your life and then expect you to deal with it. But then you may feel that you have to do it. And so like that's somebody pulling you out of your world, the world that you've created for yourself, where you are happy and you are successful and you are doing all these things, and pulling you into this dramatic place that like you just don't want to be. There's so much going on there because you've got that like people pleaser in you, and you've also got that that sense of like, well, I'm the only one that can go and do this for this person because you've set up that relationship. But realize that if you are dealing with drama that is not your own, chances are you're dealing with a toxic person, and it's something that you have to reevaluate and reset your boundaries with that person. Number three, they're controlling. And the way that you would know this is when you start to set the boundaries, like let's say you're in a relationship with somebody and you're like, what the fuck? You know, like I don't want this. And you start to set boundaries with them and they really, really fight those boundaries. There is a big difference between having consideration and it just being a rule or a law. You pretty much know this, even if it's like under the surface, because you feel like you're being controlled.
I read a couple of examples which were seemingly subtle, I guess, to some people, but I was like, that's not subtle at all. Like one woman was in a working environment where her boss was actually out of town for an extended time, and there was a man in the office who was kind of like in her personal space bubble, asking her really personal questions, commenting all the time about her appearance, calling her feisty. It became uncomfortable and distracting. She brought it to HR, and when her boss became aware of it, he told her that it was no big deal, it's common workplace behavior, and that she was unprofessional and being dramatic by taking it too personally. And I was like, how many of us have been in a situation like that? And that's one of the things is like, toxic people will often try to wield some kind of leverage over you.
If you have that feeling, if you have that gut feeling that you're being controlled, that's something that I recommend that you look closer at.
And it may seem like a scary thing to have to choose between something that affects your career or your personal life and setting your boundaries.
Our parents become those toxic, it's like, it's my roof, it's my rules, it's you got it, whatever. And so they're kind of like lording this thing over you. And then you deal with that in school. And then, of course, at the workplace, too. There you are. You've got a legit complaint. And the fact that you can lose your job. So I think we all get kind of trained into...
Oh, definitely. It's not like everyone's out to get you, right? It's not like these people are out in the world with deliberate, blatant, nefarious purposes. A lot of people navigate their lives this way. And you're right. A lot of us are kind of raised in that sort of manipulative, leverage-wielding, authority environment.
You have your landlord. He is the Lord of the land, and you must obey. I think even people that maybe are not toxic people in an environment like that could easily, because I think that that's what happens to parents. Instead of like reasoning with them and like communicating with them, it's like, because I said so.
Yeah, I've noticed that often it's when parents are overtired or kind of stressed out to their wits' end that they'll employ not so good tactics because they feel like they're at the end of their reserves.
It could either be like outright coercive, like they're like blah 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 right in your face, or it could be like under the surface. Either way, you're gonna have a gut feeling that tells you like, why do I feel like I'm not free? The other thing with that is if you're in a relationship where somebody is telling you quote unquote like, well, if you were a good friend, or if you were a good husband, or if you are a good wife, or if you are a good son, or if you were a good employee, then you would ... And then they list off all these things that you start to realize, like, these are very selfish things on your part. You basically want me to behave in a way that is good for you, that makes you happy, but you're not taking into consideration my happiness. You start to lose your own identity when you get wrapped up in something like that.
Yeah.
Because you're basically losing parts of yourself.
Yeah, you're being depleted in situations like that.
So the fourth one is that they lie and withhold the truth. And basically, when you're dealing with somebody who is toxic, a lot of times the toxicity is coming up to the surface because there is an insecurity within, right? And like I said before, it doesn't necessarily mean that the person is a bad person. It doesn't mean that. It just means that there is an insecurity within that they are protecting. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's when they start to set up rules and blame outside of themselves in order to compensate for that, that's when the issue actually starts to come up to the surface and the relationship could become rather toxic.
I recently read an article from the Freelancers Union about gaslighting, and just how insidious it is. And the reason it's so insidious is because these things make you doubt your own self-worth. They make you doubt your own memory of things. They make you doubt your own reality. Like, that can really take a huge psychological toll on a person.
If they're judgmental of other people and they kind of talk smack behind their back, but then in front of them, they don't say it, then that's where you kind of start to see the lie manifest in front of you. And a lot of times we don't even recognize that because we just see it as gossip. And honestly, anybody that gossips or is talking smack about somebody, that in of itself is toxicity.
If you're working with someone who's constantly forgetting things that you've already covered with them, like they owe you a fee for your work and they're constantly forgetting, and then they're constantly asking you, oh, what was that amount again? And you're constantly having to reiterate yourself over and over again. So that's kind of a form of gaslighting.
Yeah. Number 5 is that they always have to be right. They always have to be right. You won't get an apology from them. You'll get a justification, even if they admit that, yeah, you know what, that was kind of screwed up. I'm completely justified in this. And then they'll blame someone else, or they'll blame some circumstance, or they'll blame the situation instead of just admitting, like, you know what, this is on me, and this is something that I need to look at. And you know, there are healthy conversations that you could have with somebody. Unfortunately, when they have walls up, it's really hard to get there, and that's where a lot of that defensiveness comes from. So like, you just can't win. They're always going to be right.
Like, you enter an agreement with someone, whether it's personal or professional, right? And initially, like, let's use the professional setting as an example. Initially, there's an agreement, right? I'm going to do this work. It's going to cost this much. And you're good to go. And then all of a sudden, there's far more expected of you than what was initially agreed upon.
Right.
And often it's unspoken. So one guy cited an example of, he was doing a freelance project for a company, and it was never stated anywhere in the initial agreement that he was to attend all of these extra meetings that were unpaid. And when he brought it up, they basically said, well, this is just expected in the job description. You should have known that as a professional. It's very disappointing that you didn't know this. And so I think that's one of the key components, is that table flipping, where you bring up a discomfort or a complaint and all of a sudden it's your fault because you're not being professional or you're not being reasonable. I think that's the most insidious component of it.
Number 6 is that they're also always the victim. And that goes hand in hand with what I just said, because they're always blaming someone else for their actions. They're always blaming why it is that they feel like this on you. This person will always focus on everything outside of them in order to justify why it is that they feel or act or behave in the way that they do. And a lot of times, the person that they're blaming is you. Especially if you didn't do anything and you're like, what did I do? You know, like that tells you right there, like, oh, you might be in a toxic relationship.
Be prepared for backlash. Especially if someone's really used to treating you a certain way and all of a sudden you've decided that this isn't going to happen anymore. A lot of times backlash is a reality, because when you confront someone who is deliberately or non-deliberately gaslighting you or abusing you in some way, verbal backlash is often what they'll go for.
They'll flip the tables on you and say that you're doing something wrong, that you're the one. There will always be an excuse versus like just taking responsibility for their actions.
And I would say that that's the single biggest indicator that something is off in general in any situation. If you try to have a productive dialogue with someone about an issue and that's not possible because all they're doing is throwing blame at you, that's really the only red flag you need.
Yeah.
If you can't have a productive dialogue with someone.
Yeah. Number 7 is that they're judgmental. Kind of like what I said earlier, where they're always pointing at somebody else. They're always blaming everybody else. They're always talking smack about somebody. Even if they're not always talking smack about someone, and they do say nice things, but just if within the same breath, they're saying something kind of smackish about them and then kind of nice. Like, these are all things that you want to take a look at. It's very easy for that person to have very high standards, what they consider high standards for you, and have expectations of you. And that could be as simple as even the way you dress, and maybe not blatantly saying like, oh, that's hideous or whatever you're wearing, but to like look at you and be like, oh, you're going to wear that? Oh.
Any situation where you're feeling uncomfortable, taken advantage of, generally depleted or diminished or belittled in any way, don't be afraid to stand up for yourself.
And number 8 is the double standard. Look for the double standards. A lot of times when you're dealing with people that are toxic, they have a lot of rules and regulations of how it is that you're supposed to act, or how it is the world is supposed to act, or society is supposed to act. And when you don't fit into that standard, you're made to feel guilty. You're made to feel like you did something wrong. Essentially, you're walking around on eggshells. If you find yourself in that situation where you realize, like, I have no rules for this person, and this person has all these rules for me, chances are you're in a toxic relationship.
It's out there. If you're like going out into the world, you're going to encounter it.
Yeah.
And it's good to know or have a basic working knowledge of how to maintain your self-worth and your boundaries.
Yeah, and as artists, putting ourselves out there, we are definitely going to. And I think that that's one of the reasons that a lot of people stay in their closet, is because putting yourself out there, you're gonna deal with this stuff, and the more you know, the more you know.
Oh, if only we had the thing. I think having a support network of people who are also in the arena and striving for things and supporting one another is an excellent thing for any creative or any entrepreneur to have.
Oh yeah, because the toxic people will weed themselves out. A lot of times you stick around because, you've been friends for a long time, or because this person is my family, they're my blood, they're this, they're that, whatever excuse is, and you just kind of say to yourself like, oh, I'm going to put up with it. And you don't have to. Removing a toxic person from your life is not easy, because there is a lot of habitual things that have been going back and forth, possibly for a long time, possibly for your entire life, especially if you're dealing with a toxic parent. So there's a lot of habit there that is formed, not only between them and you, but you and them, right? So, but the first thing I focus on is that I could say no more. Like, I'm done with this. I'm done with this. And the reason that I say I'm done with this and not you, blah, 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 is because it is much more empowering to talk to yourself about yourself and what your choices are versus responding to blaming someone else, right? So I will say, like, I get to be in control of my life. I'm the one that gets to decide. I'm going to say no more. I'm done with this. I am done with it. The second thing I do is put some distance between us. I got to put some distance between us so that I can really, really dig deep and take a look inside of me and look at the situation from a distance. From a distance. It's much easier to just stay away and take whatever other steps I need to do, and once I've taken that distance from them. The third thing I do is I stay consistent. Basically, once I've set my boundaries, I stick to them. There's going to be ways where people try to weasel around the boundaries. There's going to be habits. There's going to be tantrums. There's going to be all kinds of things. You have to stick to your boundaries. These are my boundaries, because you got to remember, at this point, you are setting up a new habit for everyone involved, and that includes you. And so it's going to be easy for you to break that boundary because you're used to already breaking that boundary within your habits. So in order to set that habit for sure for yourself, it doesn't matter what they're thinking. They might throw a tantrum for the rest of their life, but it's up to you to set those boundaries for yourself. The fourth one is that you don't have to explain yourself, all right? You don't have to give a long explanation on why it is that you're doing what you're doing. Basically, this is your choice, your decision. I'm setting up this boundary because I care about it. If you want to just tell them, you don't have to go into detail. You don't have to engage with them in that. You don't have to. This is your choice. You don't need to justify it to anybody. It's not a negotiation. You're not negotiating with them. You are basically setting up your boundaries, who you are, and the kind of life that you want to live. On the heels of that is don't engage. Don't engage with them. Don't engage when they throw a tantrum, when they are calling you names.
I make YouTube videos. I'm so prolific and knowledgeable.
When whatever way it is that they respond to you, whether or not they try to make you feel guilty, they make some snide comment, they make some underhanded comment, it doesn't matter. Don't engage. Don't get drawn back into it. Think of it as a power play, right? So they're going to do something, and either you're going to give them your energy and your focus and your time, or you're just going to keep focusing on what's important to you. The next one is block them if you have to. If you got to block them, block them. Just be done with it. I mean, I've done that with people in my life where I've told them, I don't need to have a relationship with you. If you want to have a relationship with me, it's going to be on my terms, and these are my terms because this is my world. So I don't want you to bring your drama and your bullshit into my world. I'm done with that. I've lived way too long with that. I don't want that anymore. If you want to have a relationship with me, you can, but it's got to be on my terms. That doesn't mean that you're not accepting of them and you're not loving of them. The only thing is that if this is somebody that is constantly bitching and moaning and complaining about other people and just very, very toxic, and you just don't want that in your life, that is your right. That is your right. So it's not telling them this is how you need to live your life. It's just telling them when you interact with me, I don't want that. I don't want that shit in my life. And the last one is don't stop working on yourself. Remember, this is all about being able to create the world that you want, surround yourself by the people that you want. And it's easy to fall into old habits. And it's happened to me. People come in and out of your life, and you have to evaluate that as you go, because not everybody that is toxic is a bad person. It just means that you're feeling drained after your interactions, and you're feeling way too many expectations for you that maybe you didn't sign up for.
Some of the recommendations in the article were really similar and on point with the things that you said. Make sure that you're doing self-worth building. Make sure you have people around you who are supportive, and even people who you can confide in and check in with if you are feeling like you're suffering gaslighting, that you can get an objective perspective from. When it comes to professional settings, it's good to keep written records of correspondence if you feel like something questionable is going on. And maintain your boundaries, which can be really hard to do sometimes, but is really important. And even if you backslide in that, you kind of have to reestablish yourself at that point. And it can be over a long period of time or in a short amount of time. And sometimes you have to just walk away.
There are different degrees, it could be extremely toxic and you very much know that you're in a toxic relationship and you want to get the heck out of there. And then you have just little things that might be solved by just having a conversation with that person. Maybe they don't realize that that's the situation. Those are the ways that I ideally deal with toxic people, that I identify toxic people. I'm not saying that I've always been really good at that, but it's always a work in progress because, it's life. We're dealing with life. We have relationships with people. Some relationships are awesome. Some relationships not so awesome. And some relationships you're on defensive. You're I don't know, what is this? What am I experiencing here? So this is just the ability to take a close look and see is this helping me in my life? And I guess that's it. And I'm curious to know what tips and tricks do you have for dealing with toxic people? I try to keep it light, you guys. I know that this is a difficult and dark subject, but try to keep it light. Just give us some empowering tips on how maybe you've dealt with somebody who was toxic in your life, And go ahead and leave that in the comments section below. And I want to give a big shout out to the patrons. I mean, a lot of the conversations that we've had about this kind of stuff has happened on Discord with patrons. They're able to talk to each other, talk to us. And yeah, it's really cool to see that like all of these struggles that we go through as artists, it don't necessarily have much to do with like what kind of medium am I going to use or anything like that. It has to do with these kind of things, and I love being able to interact with artists from all over the world basically and see these similarities in what we deal with on a daily basis. And thank you so much for watching, you guys. You guys are absolutely freaking amazing. I know this video was pretty long, but just this was something that I really wanted to touch on and share with you. So thank you so much for watching if you've watched to this point. And yeah, you guys are awesome. I adore you. That was good.
Good day.
I guess that's it. I'm going to say goodbye. Oh yeah, you can subscribe right here. Adios.